The Young and the Restless spoilers. Thurdays full episodes August 14, 2025. Kyle Abbott had always prided himself on his ability to maneuver around any situation, to position himself in such a way that the worst conflicts seemed more like inconvenient glitches in an otherwise seamless life. But when he discovered the depths of Audra's manipulations, when he realized just how far she was willing to go to expose Claire's past and dismantle everything that stood between her and what she wanted, he knew that the game had changed. The carefully crafted image he had built for himself was no longer sufficient. The betrayal he felt toward Claire left him vulnerable, but the fight for his reputation and position had reignited something deeper in him. Now, he had no choice but to defend what was his, to hold his ground against Audra and anyone else who would dare challenge him. The quiet whispers of the past began to echo in his mind, a constant reminder of how quickly things can unravel in a city like Genoa. Kyle knew that the balance of power was a fragile thing, and any misstep could send him spiraling. But one thing he was certain of was that he would not be a pawn in anyone's game, not even in his own. His survival instincts kicked in, and with it came a cold resolve to protect the life he had built, even if it meant fighting those closest to him. The web of deceit that was slowly surrounding him was one he knew he could not escape from easily, but he was not the type of person to back down. Meanwhile, Nate Hastings, who had spent months trying to keep his distance from the drama swirling around the Newman family, found himself drawn into it all once again. Victoria had always been a part of his world, her strength, her ambition, and her complicated history with the Newmans had always fascinated him. But now, as the stakes grew higher, he found himself caught in a web of power struggles and betrayals, each move more dangerous than the last. He had once thought he could walk away, but it was clear now that his connection to Victoria, and the choices they both made, would bind them together in ways he hadn't anticipated. When Nate approached Victoria, the conversation was intense, layered with unspoken history and the weight of their respective decisions. Victoria, ever the strategist, had already calculated her next move, but Nate's presence in her life had shifted something inside her. She didn't want to be vulnerable again, especially not in front of him, but she knew that the consequences of the choices they made would have far-reaching effects. They both understood that the game they were playing was no longer just about power, it was about survival. As for Daniel Romalotti, his appearance in Genoa City had always been met with mixed reactions. But now, his focus was clear. He had been keeping an eye on his mother, Phyllis, and her increasingly questionable alliances, particularly with Kane Ashby. Phyllis, ever the master of reinvention, was enjoying the thrill of her latest business venture, but Daniel had begun to see the cracks in her armor. The more he saw, the more he worried about her choices. One afternoon, in a quiet corner of the park, Daniel encountered his mother. Her excitement about the future was palpable, but something about her demeanor made him uneasy. As they conversed, Phyllis tried to convince Daniel that everything was going smoothly, that the partnership with Kane was a solid move. But Daniel was not convinced. He knew that Phyllis had a habit of glossing over the deeper issues, of pretending everything was fine until it was too late. Everything's great. Until it's not, Daniel replied, his voice laced with skepticism. Phyllis could see that her son was not buying into her optimism, and that only made her more defensive. She asked him why he always had to be so negative about her business ventures, to which he simply responded, "Can't you trust me just a little?" Phyllis, ever the manipulator, tried to downplay her actions, but Daniel was not easily swayed. He pressed her about the details of her partnership with Kane Ashby, and Phyllis, ever the master of control, assured him that it was solid. But then, she let slip something that made Daniel's blood run cold, Kane's plan to take over all the major companies in Genoa City. It was too much, too soon, and it was clear that Phyllis had underestimated the weight of the situation. As she realized the gravity of her slip, she tried to backpedal, but Daniel was already processing the implications. "You need to stay away from Kane," he warned, his voice low but urgent. "He's not someone you can control." Phyllis, always the one who thought she had everything under control, tried to brush off his concern. "You're not scary," she retorted, dismissing his warning with a casual wave. But Daniel wasn't backing down. "So you're okay with hurting people like Nick, Lily, and Summer?" he asked, his voice cold with disbelief. "Do you really think this will end well?" Phyllis tried to deflect, claiming that Marchetti, under Kane's leadership, might actually be better off. But Daniel's frustration boiled over. "Marchetti belongs to Jabot, Mom. Do you really think you can just take over a company like that without consequences?" The conversation ended on a tense note, with Phyllis refusing to acknowledge the danger she was putting herself, and everyone else, into. Daniel's warning had fallen on deaf ears, but he knew that he had done everything he could to try to steer her in the right direction. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that Phyllis was about to make a mistake she couldn't undo. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test loyalties, reveal secrets, and force the characters of Genoa City to confront the consequences of their choices. Phyllis was on a dangerous path, and the stakes were higher than ever. Would she realize the damage she was causing before it was too late? Or would her ambition, once again, lead her down a road of no return? Only time would tell, and the city watched with bated breath as the drama continued to unfold. In the quiet intensity of the moment, Daniel's words hung in the air like a warning bell. Phyllis, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, looked at him with a mixture of defiance and desperation. "The stick isn't the solution you need right now," Daniel said, his voice laced with concern, but Phyllis wasn't ready to hear it. She clung to her conviction as if it were the only lifeline she had left. "It will work," she insisted, her tone sharp, as though she could bend the world to her will with just those words. But Daniel's gaze softened with the weight of truth he knew she wasn't yet ready to face. "It's going to blow up, Phyllis," he warned, his voice low but firm. "And you'll get burned. It might be worse than anything you've ever faced." Phyllis shook her head, the hint of fear buried deep within her stubbornness. She was used to playing with fire, but this time it was different. She couldn't see the danger she was walking into, and Daniel could do nothing but watch helplessly as she steeled herself against the storm she had already set in motion. Meanwhile, in the bustling chaos of the club, Kyle was facing Audra, his face twisted in frustration. He had pushed her away, his voice rising with anger as he demanded to know what she was doing. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. "Yeah, I'd like to know too," Claire chimed in, her voice tight with confusion and suspicion. She locked eyes with Kyle, her expression cold. "What exactly did I just see?" Audra, ever the provocateur, shot back with an ease that came too naturally. "My boyfriend can't keep his hands off me," she replied, her words a taunt, her eyes flashing with a mixture of bitterness and mischief. Kyle shot her a look of disdain. "He kissed me but acted like I was forcing him to do things he didn't want to do," Audra continued, turning toward him with an exaggerated expression of mock sympathy. "You only backed off when you saw Claire walking in, didn't you?" Kyle bristled, his jaw tightening at the accusation. "You're pathetic," he muttered under his breath, the words biting into the air like shards of ice. But Audra wasn't backing down. She stood her ground, unshaken by his words. "That's not what you said a few minutes ago," she shot back, her voice low but full of accusation. "Believe it or not, Claire, I actually sympathize with you. Whatever he says, what happened between us in Nice was private. Both sides of it." She threw Claire a pointed glance, a smirk tugging at her lips as she tilted her head. Claire's eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with skepticism. "Don't," Audra replied with a calm that unnerved Claire. "Just believe what you saw with your own eyes." With those words, Audra turned, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were leaving a room that no longer held any meaning for her. As she walked away, Kyle's words were sharp and cutting, laced with a possessiveness that Claire had grown to recognize. "Don't let that witch haunt you," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I need to stop Audra. Once and for all." Claire, still trying to process the scene she had just witnessed, looked at him with a mix of confusion and concern. "How do you plan to do that?" she asked, her gaze steady despite the swirl of emotions inside her. Kyle hesitated for a moment, his frustration giving way to a quiet determination. "I need to find a way to turn things around," he muttered, almost to himself, as if the solution was already forming in his mind. But before he could elaborate further, his phone buzzed with an incoming call, pulling him out of the moment. As Kyle took the call, Claire stood there, contemplating his words. "Turn things around," she whispered to herself. A slow smile spread across her face as she pieced the situation together in her mind. "I think I know just how to do that." Her voice was firm, her resolve hardening like steel. Claire had learned long ago that in Genoa City, the only way to win was to play the game with the right strategy, and right now, she had a plan of her own. And it would start with turning the tables. The tension in Genoa City was palpable, as the city's quiet streets simmered with the unspoken battles brewing beneath the surface. Audra, ever the strategist, was preparing for a battle that was much more than business. It was personal, a fight that would reshape the very fabric of her world. Her eyes were fixed on Claire, the woman who had so effortlessly built her reputation on the lies that Audra was determined to expose. And as the pieces of this complex puzzle shifted, Nate found himself entangled in the chaos, swept up by forces beyond his control. In the warmth of a private conversation, Nate visited Victoria at her home, where they spoke not just of business but of shared pain. Both had suffered under the weight of others' actions, Victoria, trying to hold her fractured family together, and Nate, navigating the aftermath of his own emotional battles. As the conversation moved into more personal territory, Victoria expressed her gratitude for Nate's kindness when her family had been absent. It was a rare moment of vulnerability for the stoic Newman matriarch, and Nate, ever the gentleman, received her thanks with grace. But as their conversation shifted toward Audra, Nate could not hide his own frustration. "She ended things with Victor," he remarked, a hint of disappointment in his tone. Victoria raised an eyebrow, the corners of her lips twisting in a cynical smile. "She cares more about her integrity than about owing Victor anything," Nate added, his voice betraying the confusion he still felt over Audra's sudden shift in priorities. Victoria let out a dismissive laugh, the kind that only she could pull off, half amusement, half disdain. Nate, sensing something more beneath her response, leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice low, probing. "Nothing," Victoria answered quickly, but there was something in her eyes that betrayed her. She hesitated just long enough for Nate to catch the flicker of hesitation in her gaze, and that hesitation spoke volumes. Before he could press her further, the door opened, and Claire stepped in, her presence shifting the atmosphere instantly. Victoria, quick to recover, smiled and greeted Claire, but Nate noticed the slight shift in her demeanor. Claire seemed to be in a hurry, and as she turned to Victoria, she mentioned that she had been meaning to call him about something important. But before she could elaborate, her mother casually mentioned that Nate would be attending the funeral of his brother in Chicago. The subtle mention of a family event was enough to divert the conversation. The tension between Victoria and Claire was palpable, the subtle undercurrent of unspoken words thickening the air. Claire, however, was not deterred. She turned to Nate with a soft, but determined expression, telling him that she had been thinking about him. It was a quiet, yet significant shift, a moment where the truth between them seemed to hang in the balance, waiting to be unraveled. Once Nate had left, Claire's demeanor shifted once more. She turned to Victoria with a look that was both resolved and knowing. "I'm going to tell him," she declared. "I'll tell Nate what Audra really is. She's not the person he thinks she is." Victoria, sensing the weight of Claire's words, looked at her daughter with a silent understanding. Claire's voice, now firm with conviction, continued, "Once Nate is back from Chicago, I'll make sure he knows exactly who Audra is. That girl is nothing more than a venomous snake, and it's time someone told him the truth." Meanwhile, as the city continued to churn with secrets, Nate found himself at Crimson Lights, awaiting Audra's arrival. When she finally stepped through the door, her eyes sharp and focused, he wasted no time in addressing the matter that had been weighing on him. "Are you ready?" he asked her, his voice steady despite the tension that clung to him like a second skin. Audra gave him a slight nod, her expression unreadable as she replied, "Yes, I'm ready." But as the words left her lips, the air around them thickened with the weight of unspoken truths. Just as Nate opened his mouth to speak again, Claire barged in, her eyes wide with a mix of urgency and determination. It was clear she had something on her mind, something she wanted to say, but before she could voice it, Victoria, who had followed closely behind, interrupted, casting an abrupt silence over the room. The tension between the three of them was so thick it felt suffocating. Claire, who had been ready to expose the truth, found herself cut off, unable to share what she had intended. Instead, she stood there, watching as the moment slipped away, knowing that time was no longer on her side. Audra, sensing the shifting dynamics, gave Nate a glance that told him everything he needed to know. The stakes had just been raised. Their game was no longer one of strategy alone, it was about survival. Claire's looming revelation would change everything, but whether it would bring clarity or chaos remained to be seen. For now, the battle lines had been drawn. Each player knew their position, but none knew how the game would ultimately unfold. And in Genoa City, the only certainty was that no one would emerge unscathed from the war that was about to be waged.